What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Lighting a Lamp podcast. I am Rob, and I am here with nobody. I am here by myself today, and this episode is just going to be going over the off-season grades for the different teams, and it's just going to be alphabetical by division. No other particular order, just alphabetical. So we're going to go through each of the different teams, kind of just talk about how I thought they did as far as the moves they made this offseason, what it means for the team. Does it, is it taking them in the right direction? Is it a step back, etc., etc.? So, and then of course, we're going to have some offseason awards to hand out. So, we're going to start with the Anaheim Ducks. And we're going to be starting in the new West Division. This is, of course, with the new division realignment is how I'm going to be talking about this sort of thing. And we're starting with the Anaheim Ducks. I gave them a C minus. So we're going to start off with talking about, my expectation for the Ducks this offseason. They had a disappointing year last year. The team is older. They made an important decision to not re-sign Corey Perry a couple years ago. Clearly trending towards that direction of the youth. And making an effort to get out of this vicious cycle of mediocrity that they had put themselves into. And the reason I give them a C minus is because I feel like they maybe didn't do quite enough in terms of really getting this team where it needs to be in terms of the rebuilding, because they still have a lot of pieces on this team that are at the point in their careers where they should be competing, or are at the point where it doesn't make sense to have these kind of players on a rebuilding team necessarily. I thought that there's a market for certain players like Ryan Getzlaf, for example. Ryan Getzlaf, Jakob Silfverberg. On the back end, maybe could have moved somebody like Josh Manson. And instead, they decided to go ahead and sign Kevin Shattenkirk for some reason. I'm not really sure what the implication of a move like that is for this team. Other than it's not really trending them in the rebuilding direction. And I know that the NHL isn't a video game. You can't just blow up the entire team and then immediately start to rebuild. But at the same time, some of these moves are head scratchers. I mean, Kevin Shattenkirk is 31 years old. Is he really the kind of player that you should be signing? And yes, of course, you can flip a player like him at the trade deadline, and I fully expect that Kevin Shattenkirk will be trade bait come trade deadline day. But at the same time, there's other pieces like Cam Fowler is a guy, he's 29 years old at this point. He's one of the better defensemen on your roster. You could look at moving him and getting some younger pieces back. Hampus Lindholm at this point is 27, right in 26, 27, right in that ready to compete age, and they didn't really do much. I mean, they signed Ryan Miller again as a backup. Okay, fine. I mean, the guy's 40 years old at this point. And goalies are really hard to flip at trade deadline, so I don't really see him as a trade deadline flip. But, it's just kind of questionable moves being made here. It's not showing me a real direction-driven team. It's showing me a team that thinks that maybe they can still compete, and they are in one of the weaker divisions, in my opinion. Actually, the weakest division, in my opinion, out of the four. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to compete with some of the other big boys in some of the other divisions. And I just think it's kind of a disappointing offseason because the potential was there. There was clearly a market for defensemen. There was clearly a market for a forward like Ryan Getzlaf to maybe find a new home. Adam Henrique, Jakob Silfverberg. And they kind of just sat on their hands and said that they're just going to, sign Kevin Shattenkirk and see what happens going forward. So I'm a bit disappointed in the Anaheim Ducks. I thought that they kind of had an opportunity to move the needle in a direction that would take them in the direction they need to be going, which is to rebuild. Because quite honestly, they're not going to compete anytime soon. Their older pieces are just going to start getting older and older and losing more and more trade value. And you're going to end up in a situation where you're going to have this awkward mishmash of older players and younger players. You're going to have guys in their like 35 to 38 range with guys like Sam Steele who are going to be like 26. And of course, you always need your veterans and you always need your young guys, but at the same time, you're just going to end up in a really weird kind of like Arizona Coyotes situation where it just doesn't mesh. They don't click. The team has no identity, and you're just not in a good spot. So, C- for the Anaheim Ducks coming out of this offseason. We're going to go into the Arizona Coyotes. Big fat F. I mean, this was probably as bad of an offseason as you could possibly imagine. This is probably on the level of the offseason where the Winnipeg Jets lost 4 out of their 6 defensemen. You lose Taylor Hall for absolutely nothing. He just straight up walks to free agency. You gave up 2 of your better prospects and a couple of picks, and you get nothing out of it. You get a half season of Taylor Hall, and you get slammed in the first round of the playoffs in a very uncompetitive first round matchup. Your big acquisitions this offseason include Derek Brassard and Tyler Pitlick, but you also traded away Derek Stepan. I don't understand what is really going on in Arizona. The offseason, you lost Taylor Hall for absolutely nothing. And instead of picking a lane and saying, okay, either we're going to go all in and we're going to go after big name guys, like we're going to go after, Alex Pietrangelo, or we're going to get out there and going to sign Mike Hoffman, for example, or Tyler Toffoli. Instead, you get these milquetoast, lukewarm moves by getting Derek Brassard and Tyler Pitlick. Okay, I guess. Or the other option was you say, all right, well, this experiment failed, and we're going to trade away the older pieces and start rebuilding around guys like Clayton Keller, who are only 22 years old, and Jacob Chikrin, who's only 22 years old. And, in the process, you almost lost your captain, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who clearly didn't want to be traded, by the way, based on the fact that he gave them a deadline and said, listen, if you're not trading me by this point, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not waiving my no-move clause. That was a whole fiasco, and that was a disaster. So you didn't get anything out of Oliver Ekman-Larsson. He doesn't want to go anywhere. And you didn't pick a lane. You didn't trash the team and rebuild. And you also didn't make this team competitive. In fact, you're significantly worse than last year. And what do you have to show for it other than the fact that the Devils have 2 of your better prospects and some picks from you? Your GM walked away middle of last year. The team is just in total free fall. They're not going to compete this year. Who's scoring goals on this team? Be honest. I think Clayton Keller is a great player. I like Clayton Keller. I think Connor Garland is a talented young man. I don't really think that Phil Kessel is gelling with this team at all. He put up 14 goals in 70 games last year, and that's not good enough. You didn't sign Phil Kessel to be a 20-goal scorer. You have OEL, you have Jacob Chikrin, you have Jason Demers, so you have Nick Hjalmarsson, Goligosi. You have a pretty decent defense core. We all saw what Darcy Kemper and Antti Raanta did last year, but what does it mean? what's the direction of this team? Because they're not Stanley Cup contenders, and I don't really see them being Stanley Cup contenders in the next couple of years unless they make some moves and add some pieces. I mean, Clayton Keller and Jacob Chikrin can't carry this entire team on their own. They just can't do it. And I'm not seeing movement out of this organization to give me a reason to believe in them. So, super disappointing offseason. I mean, they basically just exploded their entire team. Just a big fat F. I mean, I hate to say it because this was a team I was really excited for last year. I had them, I think, third in the Pacific Division. I was like, bro, you know, they're going to compete this year. I like the team this year. They made some moves. I like what they're doing. I like their defense. I like the goaltending. And they came out and just laid a total egg, got slammed in the first round. It wasn't competitive. It was awful hockey to watch. It looked like they didn't even want to show up. The only reason they made it past the Nashville Predators was because Antti Ranta and Darcy Kemper played out of their minds, quite literally, standing on their heads for entire games, making 40-plus saves every night. And for what? What was the point of it all? So, just a bad offseason for the team. And just, no, you get an F. Next up, Colorado Avalanche. I gave the Avs an A-. They made some moves. They were actively involved in the trading market. They acquired Devon Toews from the New York Islanders. They also made some signings, such as Tyson Barrie. Or no, Tyson Barrie went to the Edmonton Oilers. Excuse me. They traded away Nikita Zadorov, and they bought back Brendan Saad. They made some moves. They shuffled things up a little bit, but they didn't shake the boat too much to where you're sitting there like, what team am I watching right now? Realistically speaking, they probably should have been playing in that third round last year. I mean, it's just the facts is the facts. As much as I was excited about the Dallas Stars going to the third round, honestly, the Avalanche probably should have won if, the entire team wasn't hurt. Not to say, I mean, injuries are part of it all. Injuries are always part of hockey, but, I mean, they probably should have won that series. But anyway, point is, the Avs made a couple of moves, but they didn't shake the boat too much. They didn't rock things too much. I think the addition of Devon Toews is a great addition. He's a puck-moving, skating, fast defenseman, which is exactly the way that this team is playing. He'll make a nice second offensive option behind Cale Makar. He's a little bit more sturdy in his own end than Cale Makar is. Obviously not as adept with the puck as Cale Makar is, but I really do like Devon Toews. I really wish there was a way the Islanders could have held on to him, but I think he's going to fit well in Colorado. I think he's going to do well. I'm not thrilled with the Nikita Zadorov trade to the Blackhawks, to be honest with you. Yes, you get Brendan Saad. He's only 27 years old. Put up 21 goals last year. You get a little bit of depth scoring out of him, which is nice. The reason that I'm not thrilled about it is because, to me, he was necessary on this team because, he's a big, hard-checking defenseman, which is exactly the kind of defenseman you need on a team that's high-flying and offensive, because you're going to need those guys for the penalty kill. You're going to need those guys to make the other team think twice, because you don't want to end up in the same situation as the Toronto Maple Leafs, where the Toronto Maple Leafs have 6 defensemen and only one guy that actually knows what he's doing in his own end. Or one guy that you can consistently rely on in his own end, I'll say. So that, to me, is a little bit of a questionable move. I know they did it for cap reasons, but, I mean, Zadorov only being 25 years old, I mean, sure, look, he only put up 13 points, but that's not what you're getting him for. You're getting him to be an absolute freight train, and that's the kind of defenseman you need. I mean, yes, they have Eric Johnson, and there's questions about whether or not Bowen Byram is going to step in this year. I think he can easily step in, and I mean, God forbid if Bowen Byram steps onto this team. I mean, you have Cale Makar, Devon Toews, and Bowen Byram. I mean, that's that's scary. That's terrifying. That's a lot of offensive firepower. Again, kind of questionable on the defensive side of things, but by the same time, they're forwards. They have a deep forward core. They have their grit and sandpaper guys like Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, Nazem Kadri, Gabe Landeskog is even a big body. They're not soft. I just really question sometimes a little bit of the defensive side. I thought they also could have maybe tried to take a shot in the goaltending market. The thing about Phil Grubauer, which is crazy to me, is when he plays, he's good. I mean, he's averaging with his career a 2.44 goals against average. His last couple of seasons in Colorado, 2.64 and 2.63. It just seems like he has a really hard time staying healthy. And for a team like the Avs, who are a bit high-flying, you could argue the Corey Crawford effect, where you just need a guy that's just good enough to get you there. And I think that Phil Grubauer could do that for you. But maybe you want to take a look in the market just to see if you can pick somebody up for a year or two who's maybe a little less injury-prone. Last year Grubauer went down, Francouz went down, and you're starting Michael Hutchinson in Game 7, which is not ideal. So, but overall, I gave the Colorado Avalanche an A. I think they had a great offseason, or an A-, excuse me. I still do think that they're one of the better teams in the league. To me, they're still a bona fide Stanley Cup contender, and this offseason doesn't change that. It just shifts the team's focus a little bit away from a balanced lineup to they're a little bit more of a glass cannon now, a little bit more offense, a little less defense. But by the same token, I don't think it really changes my outlook on them. I still think they're a fantastic team. Up next, we have the LA Kings. I gave the LA Kings a D, and I'm really not going to go too in-depth on them. It's a very similar situation to the Anaheim Ducks. I really wish that they would have made that effort to start the rebuild, because they're just stagnating. There's nothing going on with this hockey club that's going to change my mind that they're a bottom-feeding team. They're kind of just riding out the end of this core, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You're just riding it out, letting the core play out its final years. But by the same token, you've got guys that are still good players in this league that can still get it done. I mean, Anze Kopitar put up 62 points last year, and he was a plus. He was a plus player on the LA Kings. And you've got guys like Drew Doughty, who questions arise about his defensive ability, of course, and his temperament, and whether or not he's kind of cancerous in the locker room. But he still put up 35 points. He's only 31 years old. I'm sure you could find somebody to take that deal on. Jonathan Quick, he's 34 at this point, so his, I don't know how much does he have left in the tank. I don't know. But, granted, last year, on a pretty bad LA Kings team, he still put up a 2.79. Keeping that goals against average under 3 on that LA Kings team is pretty impressive. So I just think that, again, there are several pieces on this roster that could have been moved, and instead they just kind of sat on their hands again. I really wish that they would initiate that rebuild and kind of bite the bullet, but they're out here signing guys like Andreas Athanasiou as if that's going to make a difference. It's just not. Not for nothing, but the guy just fell off a cliff last year. I really don't know what they see in him, but it's not necessarily a bad offseason, but just a disappointing one in that, they're just not ready to admit, it seems like, that the window is closed and it's over. And unfortunately, it's very much over for these LA Kings. They are not competing anytime soon. We're going to combine the next two, the Minnesota Wild and the San Jose Sharks. You both get Fs, and you both get Fs. Again, going to kind of sound like a broken record a little bit here, but these two are intertwined specifically because they made a trade where the San Jose Sharks, for some reason, decided that the answer to all their problems the answer to the problem of why can't we stay competitive, the answer to the problem of why can't we defend, and the answer to the problem of why is our scoring so unbalanced is to trade for Devin Dubnyk. Yeah, no. I mean, Dubnyk is 34. He's coming off a pretty rough season, all things considered. He played 30 games, had a 3.35 and an 890 save percentage. That's clearly just not good enough. He's coming off a couple of decent seasons before that, a 2.52 and a 2.54. But listen, I mean, honestly, it's not happening in San Jose either. This is not a Stanley Cup competitive roster, okay? You've got some nice pieces here. I mean, Logan Couture is still a great player. Tomas Hertl's still a good player. Evander Kane is still a good player. And in the back end, obviously, you got Brent Burns, you got Erik Karlsson, two pretty good players. Ryan Merkley is a really nice young guy. Marc-Edouard Vlasic is still decent. But my question is, there's no game breakers on this roster. I mean, your solution this offseason was to sign Patrick Marleau again. He's 41 years old. He's not bringing you back to the Stanley Cup Finals. It's just not happening. It's just not happening. And the answer to why your scoring is so unbalanced is because you don't have any depth, and you don't have any depth scoring at all. You barely have scoring up front to begin with, and your defense is full of holes. I mean, Vlasic is really the only guy on this roster outside of the young guys that really knows how to defend all that well. I mean, Karlsson is better in his own end now than he ever was, but he's still not a stalwart. And, I mean, Brent Burns doesn't even know what his own end of the rink looks like. And your solution to all of this was that Martin Jones was the problem, and you're going to sign and trade for a 34-year-old Devin Dubnyk? It's not happening, and it's really frustrating to me. I'm not even a San Jose Sharks fan, and I'm frustrated that they're acting like they're still going to compete, when the bottom line, the answer is you're not competing. Look, you might be able to snag a playoff spot because your division is awful. But are you competing with the Tampa Bay Lightning? Are you competing with the Colorado Avalanche? Are you competing with, I'll even throw a lower tier team at you. Are you competing with the Calgary Flames? You're not. This team can't even compete with a team that's a borderline playoff team at this point. I mean, it's so confusing. I honestly think that the Montreal Canadiens are a better team than these guys. But for some reason, it's not getting through their heads that they're just not going to win a Stanley Cup. The last era is passing without a Stanley Cup, and you just have to accept that. You just have to. Because it's not happening for you. And in a similar situation is the Minnesota Wild, who you get the Eric Staal contract off the books, which is fine. That's fantastic, but you're out here making trades for Nick Bjugstad and Nick Bonino as if you're still competing, when you just traded away Luke Kunin. I mean, sure, you've got Kirill Kaprizov coming over, and you might be starting Marco Rossi, but listen, I think Kaapo Kähkönen is ready to take that next step. He's 25 years old at this point. 24, 25. I mean, him and Alex Stalock are probably going to be splitting time. But neither one of them are really elite. Not yet, anyway. I mean, Kaapo Kähkönen can be, but not yet. I mean, your defense isn't bad. You've got Matt Dumba. You got Jared Spurgeon and Ryan Suter, but and then where are the goals coming from on this roster? Are you banking on Joel Eriksson Ek scoring a bunch of goals? You're banking on a rookie, Kirill Kaprizov, coming over and scoring a bunch of goals? Are you banking on a rookie and Marco Rossi? Where are the goals coming from? What's happening? Why are we trading for a 28 28-year-old Nick Bukestad, and why are we trading for a 32-year-old Nick Bonino? Are either one of them moving the needle for you? Because you lost in the play-in round last year to the Vancouver Canucks. And does this move the needle from the Minnesota Wild from a bubble playoff team to anything more? And the answer is no. So what's the point? You're just going to have another mediocre season of Minnesota Wild hockey over and over and over. And you're just going to keep repeating this cycle until you finally don't have a choice but to rebuild. And you should be rebuilding right now. I understand. Look, they didn't sign Mikko Koivu. That's a smart move. They got rid of Eric Stahl contract. That's a good move. They got rid of Devin Dubnyk. That's a good move. I like all that. But then why are you trading for Nick Bukestad and Nick Bonino? If you're making these moves that are indicating, listen, we're going to start the youth movement. Kaprizov is coming over. Kalen Addison's playing this year. Kaapo Kähkönen is playing this year. Great. That's fine. Then why are you making these other moves? For trade bait at the trade deadline? I mean, that's fine. But why are you taking minutes away from the young players? What's the point? I just don't understand. I'm giving them both a big fat F, and quite honestly, I don't understand where the direction either one of them is going. Up next, we have the St. Louis Blues. Now, okay, of course, got to get the elephant in the room out of the way. Lost their captain, Alex Pietrangelo. Understand that. And they traded away Jake Allen to the Montreal Canadiens. So it's Binnington's net. No question about it. I still give them a B+ because they signed Torrey Krug. They got him, and he was one of the big fish in free agency. And I think that's a great move. I think it's a really nice move for them to come in, and you're not replacing Alex Pietrangelo with Torrey Krug because you just can't. Pietrangelo, and I love Krug, I think he's a great player, but Pietrangelo's a tier above him. But you don't need to. You don't need Torrey Krug to be Alex Pietrangelo. You just need Torrey Krug to be Torrey Krug. Because you still have Vince Dunn, you still have Justin Falk, you still have Colton Parayko. You still have those other guys to kind of back him up. So you're not really looking for Torrey Krug to be anyone other than Torrey Krug. So, you got Vince Dunn still, Carl Gunnarsson, maybe Carl Gunnarsson if they re-sign him, I doubt it, but Vince Dunn. Now, you would have liked to see, and they do have actually potentially another signing. Mike Hoffman is on a PTO. Depending on the status of Vladdy Tarasenko, which it looks more and more likely that he's not going to be playing this season, or at least missing a good chunk of the season. Hoffman's a nice replacement for him. He's a nice replacement for the one-timer on the power play. So if they sign him, they're doing even better for themselves. And I just think that they handled the Pietrangelo situation the best way they could have. He walked and they said, all right, next guy up, we're going to sign Torrey Krug for 1 year less than they would have signed Pietrangelo. They save a couple $1 million. Torrey Krug comes in on a 7 by 6.5. Pietrangelo walks out on an 8 by 8.8. So you get a year less and you get $2.3 million in savings from him, which is nice. Ugh. Excuse me. And the beat goes on in St. Louis. Great team. I put them in the Stanley Cup contender category as long as Jordan Binnington can uphold his end of the bargain, and we'll see. That remains to be seen if he was just a one-hit wonder flash in the pan. Because I thought that he looked mediocre sometimes during that playoff series with the Vancouver Canucks. He looked incredibly average, so we'll see. But otherwise, the beat goes on in St. Louis, and I think they did a great job. Up next, the last team, the Vegas Golden Knights, and I'm going to give them a B. Obviously, again, they get the big fish, they get their boy, they get Alex Pietrangelo. they have to trade away a center to get him. They traded away Paul Stastny to the Winnipeg Jets for Carl Dahlstrom and a fourth. And the reason that they're getting a B plus instead of a B instead of a B plus is because I have questions about their center core now. Yeah, you got Cody Glass, who's great. William Karlsson, obviously, Jonathan March or so. But, all that being said, how much of an impact is Paul Stastny's departure going to have on this team is my big question. And, it's just kind of weird. The Vegas Golden Knights are just pulling their usual tactic of, if there's a big free agent on the market, I want to sign him. And the other reason why they got docked a couple of points is because they couldn't find a way to peacefully resolve the Marc-Andre Fleury situation. They offered him up for trade. He was on the block. They were offering even to keep half of his salary, which I'm very surprised a couple of teams didn't bite on. I think you can definitely do worse than a Marc-Andre Fleury type goalie at $3.5 million. I think there's certainly goalies that are worth less than that. And so, they had a good offseason. They get their man. They get Pietrangelo because, of course, they did. Because everybody wants to go play in Vegas. Because for some reason, they just sign every big free agent on the market. And they're just loading the team up with these no trade clauses. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 no trade clauses, no moves, or modified no trade clauses. Yikes. So we'll see. But I think they were smart to keep Robin Leonard, and as tried as they might, they couldn't resolve the Fleury situation. I expect him to be moved still at some point during the season, especially as teams start to realize maybe that their goaltending is not what they want it to be. I think one team specifically that could be interested in the services of Marc-Andre Fleury would be the Buffalo Sabres. But anyway, that being said, the beat goes on in Vegas, right? So I'm just going to give them a B. Up next, we're moving to the North Division, the Calgary Flames. I think the Calgary Flames had a fantastic offseason. They gave them a flat A. They add Jacob Markstrom, so they solved their goaltending problems where David Riddick was inconsistent at times last year. So you add, Jacob Markstrom on a pretty fair contract. $6 million ain't bad. You sign Chris Tanev, and I think that's an important signing. I think that's a signing that people are underestimating how important that is because it takes some of the pressure off of guys like Giordano and Noah Hannafin, because you can throw Tanev out on that top line penalty kill. He's going to do his job, no issue. He's going to throw the big hits. He's going to block a ton of shots. The guy's a shot-blocking animal. So they take a little bit of pressure off their aging captain. They take a little bit of pressure off the young Noah Hannafin, and they bring in a veteran who just simply does his job. So you address two areas of major concern for this team, which was inconsistent goaltending and just how much of a workload can Mark Giordano manage. They have a deep team. You're sitting, look at Matthew Tkachuk, Johnny Gaudreau, Sean Monahan, Michael Backlund, Elias Lindholm, and, of course, the depth options in Sam Bennett, Andrew Mangiapane, Dylan Dubé, who had a strong playoff run for them last year. This is a deep team. It's a rough-and-tumble team. It's the exact kind of team that wins playoff series, wins Stanley Cups, and I think they just had a fantastic offseason. So I'm going to give the Calgary Flames an A, and honestly, they're one of my teams to watch. Edmonton Oilers, guess who's getting a big fat F? And I'll explain why. Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to take a quick drink of water here. So, the Oilers didn't address any of their problems. Actually, they probably just added to their issues. Because here's the deal. In a market that was flooded, absolutely flooded with goaltenders. I mean, just look at some of the names that were on the move this offseason, okay? You got Matt Murray, Jacob Markstrom, Braden Holtby, Thomas Greiss, just to name a few. Marc-Andre Fleury's name was on the trade block. And you somehow, out of all of those guys, and you're telling me that you couldn't have pried Thomas Greiss up north and you couldn't have paid him 2 years at $3.6 million? Or you couldn't have traded for Matt Murray? I mean, Braden Holtby's only getting paid $4.3. And he clearly doesn't have an issue with going to Canada because he's playing for the Canucks. So you have to believe that there was goalies who were willing to move, because you can't tell me Thomas Greiss would rather be playing for the Detroit Red Wings than the Edmonton Oilers at 34 years old with no Stanley Cups. But he's willing to play for the Detroit Red Wings. Doubt it. Highly doubt it. So in a market that was absolutely flooded with netminders, you walk out of here, you walk out of the offseason with Mike Smith with a no trade clause. No trade clause, which means you can't even trade him and dump him. If a trade gets offered to you, you're going to have 3 goalies sitting on the roster, because guess who else has a modified no trade clause? Mikko Koskinen. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And the only move you made this offseason was you signed a playmaking center. You signed Kyle Turris. And you signed Tyson Barrie. Well, guess what? Tyson Barrie is not going to solve your defensive issues. He can't defend. And if you're expecting him to defend, you're doing him a disservice, because you're not putting him in a position to succeed. He is an offensive defenseman. Does this team need offense? Absolutely not. Yes, there were concerns about the depth scoring on this team, and that's why last year they went out and got Tyler Ennis and Andreas Anthony. You let Anthony walk, you sign Kyle Turris, and you have Tyler Ennis still. So you address the depth issue a little bit. Fine. No problem with that. But why are you signing Tyson Barrie, who can't defend, and then you're signing Mike Smith again? Because how do you strike out on every one of those guys that I just mentioned? It doesn't make any sense to me. I can't. You had $3.75 million to throw at Tyson Barrie. You're telling me you couldn't have thrown that at Thomas Greiss? Or if you combined the 3.75 and the 1.5 you threw at Mike Smith and Tyson Barrie, and you get 5.25, you're telling me you couldn't have thrown that at Braden Holtby? Just mind-boggling. Absolutely mind-boggling. I will never for the life of me understand how in a market that is flooded with not only goaltenders, but defensive defensemen, guys like Chris Tanev, guys like Kevin Shattenkirk, guys like Zach Bogosian, Mark Borowiecki, Radko Gudas, get a little bit of snarl on your back end, and you walk out of it with an offensive defenseman and a playmaking center. Because that was your problem last year in the playoffs, right? No, it wasn't the fact that you were leaking goals left, right, and center and couldn't get a save to save your season. It was you need more scoring. Absolutely mind-blowing. Awful, awful, awful decisions being made by the Edmonton Oilers here. Montreal Canadiens, going to kind of go a little bit fast on them. Gave them a C-. I mean, you heard me harping over and over again on why do they have $15 million tied up in 2 goaltenders. Somehow, beyond all belief, this team is over the salary cap. How that happened is beyond me. You get Joel Edmondson and you sign him, and I mean, that's fine. I like Joel Edmondson. I actually really do like the defense on this Montreal Canadiens team. Weber, Petrie, Edmondson, Sherratt, Kulak, and Victor Mete. I think that's a fantastic defensive core. You acquire Josh Anderson, you trade away Max Domi. Okay, I mean, you're just trading a disgruntled player for an injured player. That's fine. You sign Corey Perry. Okay, you get a little bit of snarl on your front end. I still don't think that they're a playoff team. The reason I gave them a C- is because I would like to see them make that commitment to the rebuild around guys like Jesperi Kotkaniemi, Nick Suzuki, among others, Cole Caulfield. I would like to see that commitment to the rebuild, but instead you went out and you got a 27-year-old defenseman, a 30-year-old goaltender making $4.35 million, and a 26-year-old forward. I mean, you signed Tyler Toffoli too. Again, he's probably going to be trade bait, I would have to think. But it's just, just a mediocre offseason. Not because of the players that they got, just because of the direction the team is going. I'm just still not in love with it. And then you somehow, out of all of this, ended up over the salary cap. So, mediocre offseason for the Montreal Canadiens, in my opinion. Just only because of the direction of the team is questionable. Up next, Ottawa Senators, A+. I mean, one of the best offseasons we've ever seen in a long time. I mean, they get out and they get Evgeny Dadonov. They trade for Derek Stepan. They sign Timothy Stützle. And they trade for Matt Murray. I mean, just, fantastic moves being made across the board here. You needed a goalie and you wanted a goalie that's young enough to grow with the team. So you go out and get a 26-year-old Matt Murray, and you're only paying him $6.25 million, which isn't bad. You go out and you sign your young gun, Timothy Stützle. He's probably going to be playing in the NHL this year. Still got Brady Tkachuk. Still got Colin White. You got Connor Brown. It just, the moves that they made were just fantastic because it sets them up for success. Stepan's only got 1 year left on his deal. So if he come over and, he's a total flop, well, you don't have to sign him again. You didn't really pay all that much for him either. He's here to teach the young guys. I mean, Colin White's only 23. Timothy Stützle is 18. Brady Tkachuk is 21. Logan Brown is 22. Thomas Chabot's 23. He's here to do his job and teach these young players what it means to be an NHL player. And I think that's fantastic. You go out and get Evgeny Dadonov, I mean, specifically basically just more or less for the reason I'm assuming of trade bait, which is fine. Or if not trade bait, I mean, he's still a great player, like a 25 to 30 goal scorer. Like, I honestly look at this. Oh, and it's on Alex Galchenyuk too. I look at this roster, and this roster is better than some of the other teams that are theoretically supposed to be trying to compete. I mean, this is better than the Kings roster. It's better than the Ducks roster. It's better than the Sharks roster. It's probably better than the Canadiens roster. I mean, honestly, I don't think this team is going to be bottom feeding this year. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. I don't think they'll be playing important games late in the season. But I could see them being in like pick 6 to 9 territory. I love it. I love the direction Ottawa Senators are taking. Fantastic offseason for them. Our old friends, the Toronto Maple Leafs, getting a C-. And the reason you're getting a C- is because you also didn't really address basically any of the problems that you had at all. So you go out and you sign Jimmy Vesey and you sign Joe Thornton. Okay. You sign TJ Brody. Okay. And you sign Zach Bogosian. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. And it's only a 1-year deal. I like the Zach Bogosian signing. I do. I like it a lot. Because it gives them snarl on their back end. Jake Muzzin plays with an edge. He plays hard. Zach Bogosian definitely walks the line. That's for sure. But he's the kind of guy that a team that the Toronto Maple Leafs are, they need a guy like him. Okay? You need a guy like Zach Bogosian to keep the other team in line, because we saw last year that they basically got bullied up and down the ice all over the place. So you need a guy like Zach Bogosian to come in and step in and be that edge. But then you look at the other moves they made. TJ Brody, he's an offensive defenseman. You give him 4 years at $5 million. He's not going to help your back end as far as your defense is concerned. Because really, I think that he's only slightly better in his own end than Tyson Barrie was. And he doesn't hit. He threw like 10 hits all of last season. I mean, listen, he's not changing, the culture there. And neither is Joe Thornton. Neither is Jimmy Vesey. You sign Wayne Simmons. That's great. I like the fact that you signed Wayne Simmons because you're getting a little bit of grit. You're getting a little bit of snarl. But why did you let Kyle Clifford walk then? Was Clifford really that bad? I mean, all we heard all of last season when Clifford was traded was he's our type of player. Not only is he big and strong and tough, but he can play the puck, and we love having him here, and he's a great leader in the locker room. So why'd you let him go? Because you traded one grit and grind player, Kyle Clifford, for another one in Wayne Simmons. But you still didn't increase the amount of grit that's on the team. Did you not learn your lesson from last year? And now you're going to tell me that Jimmy Vesey is going to play on your second line? And Joe Thornton's playing on your first line? Joe Thornton is not fast enough to keep up with Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner. He just isn't. It's not a good match. If you wanted to match up Joe Thornton with John Tavares, I could understand that, because John Tavares isn't exactly the fastest guy on the ice. He's not an ice burner. And Joe Thornton's not an ice burner either. But they would play well together because they're puck possession players. But Joe Thornton is not fast enough to play the game that Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, or William Nylander want to play. He just isn't. So you bump Zach Hyman out of your top six, who's one of the only guys on that team that goes to the net. You're really going to tell me that Jimmy Vesey is your solution on the second line? And you're really going to tell me that TJ Brody is going to be so much better defensively than Tyson Barrie was? Because if you're telling me that, you're lying. You're lying to yourself, and you're lying to me. This team had such an opportunity with, again, to go over some of the names: Mark Borowiecki, Radko Gudas, Chris Tanev, Kevin Shattenkirk. And you walk out with TJ Brody, and then some of the other players that you could have signed in free agency, if you want some grit and grind players: Nate Thompson, Mark Jankowski, Tyler Mott. Some of the other ones, for example, like Nick Cousins, Derek Grant. And you walk out of there with Jimmy Vesey, Joe Thornton. And Wayne Simmons, yes, but Jimmy Vesey and Joe Thornton. That's not good enough. It's not good enough, and you're not moving the needle. I expect that the Toronto Maple Leafs will be good in the regular season, as offensive teams typically are. But when it gets down to that postseason, they're not doing anything to make me believe that they're going to be any different. So, not thrilled with what I'm seeing from the Toronto Maple Leafs, got to be honest with you. Up next, we have the Vancouver Canucks, and Vancouver Canucks got an A+ from me. I think the Canucks had a great offseason. Honestly, I really do. And yes, they took a step back. I do expect them to be a slightly worse team than they were last year. However, it's calculated. And we talked about this. Some of the really, really bad contracts come off the books on this team in a couple of years. Louis Erickson's contract comes off the book. Roberto Luongo's recapture penalty comes off the book. You're getting Brandon Sutter's contract. That's not a bad contract, but it comes off the books in a year. Sven Berchi's contract, which I assume will not be renewed for $3.36 million, that comes off the book. Russell's contract comes off the book in 2 years. So they're setting themselves up. They said, all right, listen, we're not winning a Stanley Cup in the next 2 years. So I'm not mortgaging the future and selling the farm for a couple years of competitiveness by keeping guys that want like 5 or 6 year contracts. So you let Chris Tanev go. You let Tyler Toffoli go. I really wish I would have kept Tyler Toffoli, though. I think he could be useful to this team. But you let those guys go, which is fine. You bring in Nate Schmidt, who's a big help on the back end. I actually really like that signing of Nate Schmidt for the Vancouver Canucks. I think he's going to fill a lot of those holes that Chris Tanev leaves. He's a different kind of player. He's a little bit more two-way than defenseman, but I like the signing of Nate Schmidt, and I like that they didn't panic and that they're willing to say, all right, listen, we have a chance here to really structure this team the way we want it to be. Because beyond next year, they have 2 forwards under contract. Beyond next season. That's Bo Horvat and JT Miller. So they really have an opportunity here to let these bad deals come off the books and to really sit down and say, all right, listen, we got to give Brock Besser a contract. Got to give Brandon Sutter a contract. Tanner Pearson's got to get a contract. Quinn Hughes is coming up. Ola Ulevi's coming up. Alex Edler's contract is up after this year. We have an opportunity here to really, really see what the direction we want to take in. So I think it's fantastic offseason for the Vancouver Canucks. I do expect them to take a slight step back, but it's calculated and it sets them up for success in the future. Up next, we have the Winnipeg Jets. The Winnipeg Jets I gave a B to, and the reason I gave them a B is because they addressed the concern that has been on the team's mind for a long time, which is that second-line center, and they went out and got Paul Stastny. Now, that being said, it still does sound like, from what we're hearing, that Patrick Laine wants a trade. His contract is up after this year. So we're seeing where that's going to go. But Paul Stastny's back, which addresses their concern on the second-line center aspect of it. And then they went out and they signed Dylan DeMello, which I think is a fantastic signing. Adds a little bit of stability to that back end. A little bit of a veteran presence. He's 27 years old now. So, you address 2 major areas of concern, which was the second-line center and your defense. And their defense still isn't fantastic. Don't get me wrong. It's not lighting the league on fire. But they did address a major area of concern. They added a little bit of veteran presence. Dylan DeMello's steady, crease-clearing type defenseman. They also went out and signed Nate Thompson. It's a great signing. Gives them a little bit of grit on that back end. Gave them a B because they didn't address the Patrick Laine situation, and we're waiting to see what the outcome of all that's going to be. I have no idea how they're going to handle that. But otherwise, I think they did well. They didn't go crazy. They didn't sell the family farm. But they're putting themselves in a position to be successful in this upcoming season. And as a result, I like the moves they're making. They didn't panic. They didn't do too much, but they addressed some areas of concern, so I'm going to give them a B overall. All right, so we're going to head on over to the Central, quote-unquote, division for this upcoming year. We're going to go to the Carolina Hurricanes. I gave the Carolina Hurricanes a B-, mostly just because they weren't super active. They picked up Jesper Fast from the New York Rangers on a 3-year deal. Which is not so bad. But really, outside of that, the Carolina Hurricanes were not really super-duper active as far as free agency is concerned, or as far as the trade market was concerned. They were more just in the realm of kind of keeping the core together. And I gave them a B- because they are a good team. They do have a good roster in Carolina. They have a nice core, nice pieces pretty much up and down the lineup. I mean, their defense is really nice. It's Slavin, Hamilton, Gardner, Fleury, young prospect Jake Bean, and of course up front they still have Sebastian Aho, Svechnikov. They add Jesper Foss for a nice little bit of depth option. Probably going to be playing on the third line. The reason that I gave them a B- is I really would have liked to have seen them try to hold on to Joel Edmondson. I thought it was kind of strange that they would trade for him and then kind of just let him walk, not even re-sign him or anything like that. And I really did like the way that he rounded out that defensive core. So I would have liked to see them maybe take a run at keeping Joel Edmondson. But, I mean, other than that, it's just a good offseason. Again, I talked a little bit of points for the Edmondson issue. I docked a couple of points because I would, again, it's hard to say, but I really would like to see the Carolina Hurricanes invest in a different goaltender. It's hard to say because he's only been there for 2 seasons, but I really do feel like this is a championship caliber team with just okay goaltending. But that being said, I can't really fault them too much. So B- for the Carolina Hurricanes, and I expect them to be a good team in this upcoming season. Up next, we have the Chicago Blackhawks, and I gave the Blackhawks a B+. And honestly, a lot of that B+ just comes from the Blackhawks' willingness to do what other teams are not doing, which is admit that it's time to rebuild. Chicago really wasn't very active in terms of making any moves. They let Corey Crawford walk, which I think is a good thing. They were active in the trade for Nikita Zadorov, which I do like that trade for them. Zadorov is a 25-year-old defenseman who fits kind of into that age profile of a rebuilding team. And you can say what you want about, they still have Taste, they still have Kane, they can still compete. I think it's smart. I think what the Blackhawks are doing is smart in admitting and being like, listen, we're not winning the Stanley Cup this year. It's just not happening. Not with this roster, not with the teams we're trying to compete against. And they're right. This roster, as much as I like guys like Kirby Dach and Alex DeBrincat and Dominic Kubalik, along with, Dylan Strome, Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, they can't compete against those Tampa Bay Lightning teams or the teams that are like the Colorado Avalanche. They can't. They just can't do it. And they weren't going to go out and invest in a goaltender just to try to squeak out maybe one more run. They're going to sit back. They're going to rebuild. They're going to let their bad contracts come off the books. And honestly, I think they're going to be a better team in the long run for it. So B+ to the Chicago Blackhawks. Most of that just being because they're willing to do something other teams are not willing to do, which is admit when it's over and commit to actually rebuilding their hockey club. Up next is the Columbus Blue Jackets. And Columbus, again, one of those teams that was not super duper active as far as major signings go. Of course, they did sign Mikko Koivu, which I do think is a nice fourth line depth center for them. Mikko was always known as one of the better defensive forwards in the league, so I think he's going to fit right in with that John Tortorella type system that they have going. He's not really going to be expected to do as much as he was in Minnesota. And I mean, to be honest with you, really the only thing that this roster needs is a serious game breaker. I do like the Max Domi trade. I think it's great. You're bringing Max Domi, who's a guy that just for some reason just can't seem to find a way to consistently fit in on any one given team. He comes out of the gate with a 52-point rookie campaign, then 38, 45. Comes to Montreal, puts up 72 in his first year, then last year 44. He just can't seem to stick on any one roster, but I think he's going to fit in perfectly with John Tortorella. He's got 300 PIMs and 375 career games, so he's a hard-nosed, doesn't take nonsense from anybody type player, which is exactly the kind of players that fill out this entire roster. From top to bottom, it's just filled with guys that just do their job and don't take any nonsense. And honestly, I don't think the Columbus Blue Jackets really needed to be super active, except for I really would have liked to have seen them potentially take a run at somebody like Tyler Toffoli, maybe Mike Hoffman, just somebody that you can consistently rely on to put the puck in the back of the net when guys like Cam Atkinson are struggling to find the back of the net. Atkinson only 12 goals last year after a 41-goal season. Maybe just another guy to kind of take a little bit of the pressure off him and help fill out that scoring on the top six. But other than that, I really like the trade for Max Domi. I think he's going to fit in perfectly with this Columbus Blue Jackets roster. And they really didn't need to be super active. So B+ to the Columbus Blue Jackets. Up next is the Dallas Stars, a team I was a little bit disappointed in just because of how inactive they were. The only real major thing they did was retain the services of Anton Khudobin, which is important. I think he's a perfect fit for the Dallas Stars, especially with just how injury-prone Ben Bishop tends to be. So, having a guy like Anton Khudobin there who you can consistently rely on to be an excellent backup and an excellent starter when he's called upon, perfectly fine with that. I still love the defense in Dallas. It's honestly one of the best defensive cores in the league, if not the best. And the forward core, you can say what you want about a lack of an elite goal scorer, but it's filled with guys that can all chip in and hit 20 goals. And if you have a roster full of guys that all hit that 20-goal mark, then you don't really necessarily need that. I want to see a little bit more out of Jamie Benn, but let's say Jamie Benn hits his 20. Then you got Radulov who can hit his 20. Joe Pavelski can hit his 20. Tyler Seguin can get his 20. Denis Gurianov can get his 20. So that's 5 guys up front that all have the potential to be 20 goal scorers. Now, it's a big if. They might not all hit that. Seguin had an okay season with 50 points. Pavelski was a bit of a disappointment with 31 points. Radulov, we need to see a little bit more consistency out of him, only 15 goals. And Jimmy Benn, only 39 points. Obviously, guys like Ben and Pavelski are bringing things to the table other than the scoring. But in order for this Dallas Stars team to be successful, they cannot rely solely on Miro Heiskanen and John Klingberg to provide all of the offense. You just can't have it happen. You need to get some scoring out of your forwards. Despite the fact that Heiskanen and Klingberg are absolutely fantastic defensemen, along with guys like Esa Lindell, Andrei Sekera, Jamie Alexiak, you can't rely on them to provide the entirety of the scoring. You're going to need to get some goals out of your forwards. So I would have liked to see, again, similar situation to the Columbus Blue Jackets. Can't fault them for keeping the core together. But I would have liked to see them maybe take a run at an elite goal scorer, potentially pick up somebody in the market that way. But other than that, I'm just going to give them a flat C because they didn't really make any trades. They just retained Anton Khudobin, and you can't really blame them for that. Detroit Red Wings, just going to keep it flat and simple. They weaponized the cap, and that's all they need to do. They signed Thomas Greiss for a 2-year deal. I'm sure he's probably... there's potential for him to play out that entire contract. Detroit signed Troy Stetcher, They signed Bobby Ryan. They're basically just signing redemption contracts on the off chances that these guys come back, prove that they still have something left in the tank. They can flip them at the draft or at the trade deadline. And that's a perfect plan. You can flip all 3 of those guys. Thomas Greiss can be flipped. I'm sure that If, Ilya Samsonov or Tristan Jarry start to struggle, you'll probably see Pittsburgh come calling and asking for the services of Thomas Greiss. Bobby Ryan, if he even turns into a 20-goal scorer again, that's a fantastic contract. 1 year, $1 million. You can flip him at the trade deadline. Same thing with Troy Stecher. If he regains his form, he becomes another top 6 defenseman. You can flip him at the trade deadline. Keep it short and simple on Detroit. They did exactly what they had to do. They weaponized the cap, and they're looking decent going into next season. The Florida Panthers, big F, big fat F. How can you not be disappointed with this offseason as a Florida Panthers fan? Mike Hoffman walks. Evgeny Dadonov walks. And now, granted, listen. Technically speaking, Mike Hoffman doesn't have a contract yet as of the recording of this episode. But he's gone. And I don't see the direction this roster is going. I really, really don't. You sign Radko Gudas, which is fine, and he's a good, solid, nose to the grindstone type guy, but I don't see the direction. Are you trying to compete? Because trading away Vinny Trocheck and then letting Hoffman and Dadonov walk is not how you compete. You make the trade for Patrick Hornqvist, and listen, the Florida Panthers got probably the single worst contract in the National Hockey League off the books with Mike Matheson. That contract was horrendous. So they got the Mike Matheson contract off the books. You pick up Patrick Hornqvist, which is, that's pretty good. He's a guy that goes to the net. He does the right things. He's a consummate professional. He can help the younger guys on the team out. He'll free up, and I actually really like the idea of him freeing up Alexander Barkov and Jonathan Huberdeau to do what they have to do, so you don't just stick one of them in front of the net. It frees them up to go be effective players on the perimeter and in the circles, which is honestly a better way for them to operate. But you just lost 2 of your top 6, and you didn't really replace him with anything. Where are the goals coming from? We know that Barkov's going to put up goals. You know that Huberdeau can put up goals. Who else are you really banking on? Patrick Hornqvist will probably get 20 just from the front of the net, which is perfectly valid. Just left Frank Vetrano, but I don't see what direction is this roster going in. Because you trade away Vinny Trocheck, and then you let Hoffman and Dadonov walk. You just let basically an entire first line walk off your roster. I don't see the direction this team is going, and quite honestly, I'm extremely disappointed in this offseason for them because they had such potential, and yet they just kind of let it fall in the kitchen sink. So I'm not really entirely sure what direction this roster thinks it's going, but I don't see the direction, and quite honestly, do I think that they can compete in this Central Division? Yes, only just because it's horrible, honestly. We will be doing our season standings predictions next episode, so I won't go too deep into it, but you really don't have that many good teams in here. And sure, you might make the playoffs. Do I think you're going anywhere after that? No, I don't. And I don't know where this roster's going. Because if you did want to compete, you had your options. You could have tried to lure Taylor Hall over here. Tyler Toffoli was on the market. You can make some trades. Brendan Saad was apparently on the market. And yet, you lost the first line, and the only guy you picked up was Patrick Hornqvist. So, a little questionable. I'm not a huge fan of this offseason from the Panthers. I'm actually really disappointed in them because they were in a good direction, and then they kind of just made that mind-boggling trade in the middle of the season. The only good thing they did was fleece the Pittsburgh Penguins into taking that Mike Hoffman or the Mike Matheson contract. Nashville, just to see. They didn't really do a whole lot. They let one of their 18 million playmaking centers walk. It was I can literally see his face, Kyle Turris, thank you. I don't know why that was so hard. Kyle Turris, he walks in free agency. You end up picking up Luke Cunnin, which, I mean, that's great. I think Luke Cunnin is a really good young player, honestly. He appears to have a lot of upside. You also end up signing Eric Howla to a contract, and Howla's a good depth option. But the reason I only gave them a C is because they still have that same problem, which is where are the goals coming from? You know, you sign Mark Borowiecki, who's a consummate Nashville Predators type player, hard nosed to the grindstone, doesn't take, anything from anyone. But where are the goals coming from this roster? Are you really banking on Roman Josi putting up another 65-point season? Because Howla's not getting you 30 goals. Luke Cunnin might maybe get you 30 goals. Victor Arvidsson was supposed to be the answer, and he was supposed to be the goal scorer. He put up 15 goals last year. Philip Forsberg was supposed to be the answer. He's supposed to be the goal scorer. He put up 21, which isn't bad. I mean, but he's always been more of a playmaker. He scored 30 goals in Nashville his first 2 years. But it's another team where what direction are we going? North, south, east, or west? Rebuilding, competing. Where are we going? In the NHL, you have to be getting either better in a hurry or worse in a hurry. And this roster is getting neither in a hurry. It's getting mediocre in a hurry. And you don't want to do that because you don't want to end up as the Minnesota Wild. You don't want to end up as the next New York Islanders from 2003 to 2012. You can't end up in this cycle of mediocrity because it's going to kill your franchise. And I don't understand where the Nashville Predators are going with this roster. So I'm giving them a C. Do I think they can compete? Not really. I think their window's kind of closed. I know I picked them last year to win the Stanley Cup, but this year kind of proved to me that I don't think they've got it in them, and this roster is not getting any better in a hurry. Tampa Bay Lightning, they get a B. I mean, they weren't super duper active. They re-signed Pat Maroon, which is a nice deal for them. They re-signed Luke Shen, which is a nice deal for them. They got a little, I hate to say lucky with certain guys not being able to play because they can stick them on LTIR. And obviously, look, it's never lucky to have somebody get hurt. You never want to see somebody hurt. You never want to see them miss the entire season, especially somebody on the caliber of Nikita Kucherov. It's a huge blow to the game of hockey to not have him playing. What it does, though, is it buys these guys another year. And they're going to have to come to a reckoning with this contract situation at some point. But at the same time, the fact that they were able to keep as many players on this roster as they currently have is pretty impressive, all things considered. So I gave them a B for finding a way to not explode the roster, basically, despite being, basically up against the cap real hard. But, I'm not, they didn't do anything mind-blowing, but they did enough to earn themselves another shot at the Stanley Cup, and for that I gave them a B. Boston Bruins, you get a D. I mean, Torrey Krug walks out on you, Zdeno Chara walks out on you, and you swing and miss on Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who I'm not really even sure why you were in on in the first place. You don't really sign anybody that's moving the needle back to where you want it to be. You're going to have injuries to start the year. Pasternak and Marchand are hurt. You're still paying David Backes this year. It's just a bad offseason for the Boston Bruins, a very rare bad offseason for the Boston Bruins, and I have a lot of questions. I don't know how good this defense really is. You have Charlie McAvoy, Matt Grzelcyk, Brendan Carlo, John Moore, Connor Clifton, and Jeremy Lauzon. Kevin Miller's on the injured reserve list. It's questionable, and especially for a team like the Boston Bruins, who are clearly still in that win now mode, as they should be, because Krejci's 34, Bergeron's 35, Marchand is 32, and Tuukka Rask is 33. There's no better time to compete than now for this roster. And yet you didn't do anything to really make me feel all that great about your defense when your best defenseman, Torrey Krug, and your captain just walked out. There was no answer from the Boston Bruins. So on that basis, I gave them a D. And again, I'm not going to get too into the specifics of how I feel about them going forward because we're going to be doing standings predictions next time. Buffalo Sabres, B+. I mean, listen, honestly, the Sabres don't have a choice. They have to get away. They have to just find a way to get Jack Eichel into the playoffs. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So you'd make the trade for Eric Staal. You sign Taylor Hall, who, look, let's be honest here, Taylor Hall's not staying in Buffalo. Okay, this is a 1 year. I'm just upping my market value until a contending team has enough money to sign me contract. That's it. That's what it is. I would personally love for Taylor Hall to stay in Buffalo because, honestly, this is a franchise that deserves a little bit of a break. But at the same time, I can't really see it happening. Goodness. But you have to find a way to get Jack Eichel into the playoffs. You don't have a choice. You just don't. And, I can't give them an A, though, because they didn't address some of the concerns, namely in net. If you want to keep Linus Ullmark as your 1B, fine, but you can't have both Linus Ullmark and Carter Hutton as your 1A, 1B, because quite honestly, they're just not good enough. And quite honestly, the defense in front of them isn't good enough to support a 1A, 1B system. You need a starting goaltender for this defense. I think this defense is fine. Rasmus Ristolainen, Jake McCabe, Rasmus Dahlin, Henry Jokiharju. I think they're fine players. But let's be honest here, they're not exactly defensive stalwarts. You don't have a shutdown guy on here. Jake McCabe is a fine player, but let's be honest here, he's not a Shea Weber. He's not a matchup guy. And as a result, you just don't have the goaltending to support the defensive core. So you've got to find a way to make this work. I think they had a great offseason. They honestly have one of the best top sixes in the NHL at this point. But there was a goalie market available. You could have got Marc-Andre Fleury at 2 years at $3.5 million because Vegas was offering to retain half the salary. And you kind of sat on your hands a little bit. I think the Eric Staal trade is great. I think the Taylor Hall signing is fantastic. Just wish it would have done a little bit more. New Jersey Devils. I'm going to keep this short and sweet. Didn't really do much. Signed Corey Crawford. Okay. Maybe. Hooray? Question mark. Other than that, they didn't do anything. And honestly, I applaud them for not doing a whole lot because I applaud them for not overreacting. I applaud them for not panicking and saying, oh, God, we got to make the playoffs. We got to make the playoffs. Got to make the playoffs. They acquire Ryan Murray, which is fine. I think he's a great guy. Or I don't know him as a person. I think he's a decent defenseman, I should say. Mackenzie Blackwood really opened my eyes last year, and I think I can definitely see the potential in him now that I couldn't see before. So it makes sense that they don't go for a goalie in the market. It makes sense that they sign Corey Crawford, who's honestly, by all metrics, except for the eye test, is coming off a decent season. The eye test, he kind of failed miserably. I didn't like the way he looked. I didn't like the goals he was letting in, but, the Subban contract comes up in 2 years. Ryan Murray's contract comes up in a year. Zajak's contract is up in a year. It's going to be interesting to see the direction this team going. I don't really know if I wish they would have been more active because I don't really know if there was anything really they could have done given their cap situation to really energize this roster enough to be a playoff team. So I gave them a C because they weren't super active, but they didn't tank the team either. So I didn't want to give them a lower grade. New York Islanders, again, kind of a similar situation. They really haven't done a whole lot. They traded away Devon Toews for picks in order to make cap room. Johnny Boychuk ended up retiring, so that's going to give them a little bit of cap relief. Ilya Sorokin came over, which is great. Something we've been waiting for a long time. The white whale has finally landed. Of course, the Matt Barzal situation is still outstanding. He still does not have a contract, and there are still going to be moves made. That whether or not those moves are going to be somebody like Thomas Hickey or Leo Komarov, whose names have been thrown around, or if it comes down to it, potentially somebody like, Josh Bailey, who might have to be moved out. It remains to be seen. They're in an interesting situation where they still need to make moves to make room for Matt Barzal. Honestly, this roster going into next season looks pretty similar to the one last year. You lose Devon Toews, which is unfortunate, but Noah Dobson fits the same shoes, essentially, a puck-moving, speedy defenseman. And I think playing more time with Noah Dobson playing more time is really going to help him round out his game. It's going to help settle him in. He looked a little sketchy at times last year, but I think it's only going to help him. And honestly, I would have liked to have seen Lou Lamoriello be more aggressive in trying to solve the cap issues, but by the same token, he was put in a very difficult position by the fact that the cap was stagnant. And so I can't fault him too much. I would have liked to have seen him be a little bit more active. Of course, the Barzal situation is still outstanding, so that's why I give him a C at the end of the day. Could be upgraded later, could be downgraded later, because there are still moves to be made here. But the New York Rangers weren't super duper active. I gave him a B+, just because they managed to get the Mark Stahl contract off the books. They somehow managed to sign Jack Johnson, which is unfortunate for them. But they decided to buy out Henrik Lundqvist, which was unfortunately a very necessary step for them to take in order to ensure that Igor Shesterkin and Alexander Georgiev are your 1 and 2 going into next season. So, unfortunately for them, this is a team that has a lot of buyouts on the books, and they have buyouts on the books until 2022, 2023. This year alone, they're paying 12.9 in buyouts in terms of cap. So, they managed to make some room with the Mark Stahl trade, which I think is great. Other than that, they weren't super active. Of course, you draft Alexis Lafreniere, and you just keep on trucking. So, decent offseason for the New York Rangers. Gave them a B+. Flyers, again, another one of those teams that wasn't super duper active at the offseason. They kind of just did their thing. If I can find where they are on this website. And to be honest with you, they don't need to do anything. They're arguably the best team in the division right now. I mean, when you look at that division that they're in, they're clearly front runners. I still clearly think that they are a Stanley Cup contender. It's not really even a question to me if they are or not. I think they are. And they didn't really need to upgrade anything. I mean, they have everything they need, essentially. They made sure that they shored that up by getting Kevin Hayes, that second-line center. And, the defense is still fantastic. Provorov, Sanheim, Justin Braun, Gostisbehere. They signed Eric Gustafsson, Robert Haig. They still have Carter Hart on his rookie contract, which is unbelievable, just how good he is. Of course, Nolan Patrick is still in the IR. So this team still has options, and they didn't really need to go out into free agency and do anything crazy. So I like the fact that they stood pat, and I like the fact that they more or less said, listen, yes, we lost to the New York Islanders last year, but we're not going to explode the family farm to try to sign a big name free agent. So I like the fact that the Flyers just relaxed. They stayed calm. They did what they had to do. And, just kept on trucking. And the last two teams, which is, of course, very interesting. It's interesting that more of the teams in the East I've noticed weren't super active for good reasons, like the Flyers and the Rangers, and teams in the West were not active for the wrong reasons, like the Ducks, the Kings, and the Sharks. But anyway, the Pittsburgh Penguins, I gotta give them an F. And honestly, a large reason that I gotta give them an F is because of that Mike Matheson contract. That is a horrendous contract. He still has 6 more years at 4.875, and starting next year, he has a modified no trade clause. For what? What has he done to earn this contract? And yet, the Pittsburgh Penguins tried to make room by trading away Patrick Hornqvist and ended up with less room because they retained salary on the Nick Bjugstad trade. What? Hello? I mean, listen, you get Jason Zucker under contract, which is fine. You acquire Kasperi Kapanen, who I think is a fantastic player. If he gets a chance on the top 6 in Pittsburgh, I think a lot of people are going to be surprised at just how good of a player he really can be. I really do like Kasperi Kapanen, and I think he was getting shafted on ice time in Toronto just because of all the players in front of him. So I think that's a great acquisition. But Mike Matheson, 6 more years at 4.875. He's your longest tenured defenseman. He's making more than Brian Dumoulin is. Like, I look at these contracts and they're just horrendous. Not to mention the fact that I'm also not in love with the fact that they're going into the year with Tristan Jarry as their bona fide starter, because you don't really have a support system. I mean, you have Casey DeSmith, okay, but you don't really have a support system. And Tristan Jarry's career is 62 games old. I'm not saying he can't do it, because we've had people surprise us in the past, but I'm saying you want a little bit of a cushion, because clearly the Pittsburgh Penguins think they're in a win-now mode. And yet, you don't have a backup. Go get Thomas Greiss. Because can Casey DeSmith win out if you need him to? Probably not. Or even if you can, are you willing to take that risk? I don't think so. Big F for the Pittsburgh Penguins, mostly on the basis of them getting that Mike Matheson contract. That is horrendous. Single-handedly, basically, almost threw the series away for the Pittsburgh Penguins, or for the Panthers against the Islanders. And last but not least, the Washington Capitals. I gave them a C because, again, they weren't super duper active. It was just super unfortunate for them, I think, what ended up happening with Henrik Lundqvist, because they did the right thing by trying to get a support system for Ilya Samsonov. So I do expect at some point them to be active in the market for a backup goaltender. But they go out to get Justin Schultz, they get Zdeno Chara, who I like. I like the fact that they round out the defensive core a little bit. They go out and they get Trevor Van Riemsdyk, who's not a bad player in his own right. So they round out the defensive core. They acquire Connor Sherry, who I think is a decent player. But to me, the Capitals did a better job than the Penguins, only just because they didn't acquire a horrendous contract for the sake of trying to make it seem like they're doing something. And of course, they end up getting a new head coach, Peter Laviolette. who's a great coach. I really do like that fit for them. I do expect them again, like I said, to be active in the backup market at some point, because right now your backup is somebody who has no NHL stats. So I can't fault them for doing what they did, but acquiring Char is a good move. Acquiring Lundqvist was the right move. Craig Anderson is, of course, there on a PTO, so he might be the answer. Maybe. I don't think so, but we'll see. But I'm giving the Capitals a C. So my offseason awards, the most improved award goes to the Calgary Flames. I like the fact that they addressed two major issues of last year, which was inconsistent goaltending. You go out, you get Jacob Markstrom, who's coming off a great year. The lack of production you were getting out of Mark Giordano was concerning. So you go out and you get Chris Tanev, who can take some of the heat off of him. No pun intended. He can play the first line penalty kill. He can play more of those matchup type minutes to free up Mark Giordano, to let him do his offensive thing. I like that. Most interesting was the Buffalo Sabres, because they round out their top 6, but I'm not quite sure it's good enough to get them into the playoffs. And it's interesting because it's so clearly and so obviously a last-ditch nuclear arms race effort to try to get Jack Eichel to stay in Buffalo. And yet they didn't address their goaltending concerns. And they didn't really round out the top 6 all that much. Or the defense all that much. So they're a team to keep an eye on. But I'm not so sure that it's going to do anything for them. The worst offseason goes to the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Arizona Coyotes, because I couldn't pick just one. I mean, the Penguins get that awful contract from Mike Matheson. They retain salary on a Nick Bjugstad trade. They don't get a backup goaltender. Just blah, blah, blah. And the Arizona Coyotes, you trade away Derek Stepan. You don't pick a lane. I don't know where your roster's going. I'm really disappointed in you because I was really hyped for you last year. Taylor Hall walks for literally nothing. So essentially you paid all those prospects and those picks for half a season of Taylor Hall, and you got nothing out of it but a first-round exit. Terrible. Just bad. The most confusing award goes to the San Jose Sharks, because you trade away some of your older pieces, but then you go and get Devin Dubnyk. Why? Are you trying to rebuild? Because that's not how you rebuild. Acquiring Devin Dubnyk does not help you rebuild. So they're the most confusing team, because I'm not quite sure what they were thinking, what lane they were picking, and where they were going. And then the most disappointing award goes to the Edmonton Oilers, because in a team that has such obvious needs, you need help on the back end in terms of your defensive defensemen, and by God, you need help in net. And this was the best goalie market we have seen in a long time. It really was. There was a lot of good goalies available. Jacob Markstrom, Matt Murray, Braden Holtby, Thomas Greiss. And you walk away with Mike Smith with a no-trade clause? Hello? Were you paying attention at all? Do you not realize that your goaltending was what sunk you last year? And then in a market flooded with defensive defensemen, you come away with Tyson Barrie? An offensive defenseman? What? Why? And then the forward you sign is a playmaking center. What? Are you trying to drive Connor McDavid out of Edmonton? Because this is how you do it. This is how you do it. Do you not want Connor McDavid to be happy in Edmonton? Because this is exactly how it gets done. I don't understand. I don't get it. The entire NHL knows your flaws. The entire National Hockey League knows your roster weaknesses. And so, great. You can argue they don't want to trade because they don't want to help you. But then you have an off season with free agents available in the very positions you need, and you walk away with a playmaking center. Why? I don't get it. So I hope you guys enjoyed my little rants about off-season grades. Just to round it off here, I want to congratulate Team USA Hockey on their World Junior Classics gold. Way to go, boys. Spencer Knight was unbelievable. Trevor Zegras was unbelievable. Alex Turcotte was unbelievable. And that's just to name a few. Obviously, the whole team played fantastic against Team Canada. The future's looking bright for U.S. hockey, that's for sure. So congrats, boys, on your gold. Well earned. And next week's episode is going to be on our standings predictions. And then after that, we are in the season. It's fast approaching. After next week's episode on standings predictions, it's going to be back to our weekly episodic content. I'm super excited for that. I hope you guys are excited too. If you have any suggestions, any comments, anything at all, please let me know. Put it down in the comment section down below. Respond to us on Twitter at lightingthelamb1. If you have any episode suggestions, if you have any topics that you want to hear us talk about, just let us know, because I'm so down to talk about what you guys want to hear us talk about. Other than that, again, we'll be just, picking our topics every week, and yeah, ready to go. So next week, standings predictions, and the week after, one episode a week. Hope to see you guys again next time.